dawn of a new age, the moment the sky burned. Hiroshima, nestled along the banks of the Ota River, awoke to a morning that seemed no different from any other in the summer of 1945. The city, with its narrow streets and wooden houses, had so far been spared the relentless firebombing that had reduced so many other Japanese cities to ashes. For the men of Hiroshima, shopkeepers opening their shutters, students preparing for school, labourers heading to factories, and soldiers stationed in the city, life moved with a sense of fragile normalcy, even as the distant thunder of war echoed across the nation. The date was August 6, 1945, a Monday marked on calendars as just another day, but destined to be remembered as the day the world changed forever. At precisely 8:15 a.m., as the city's routine unfolded, a light erupted in the sky, so intense, so alien, that it seemed to tear the very fabric of reality. It was a light that no one had ever seen before, a blinding flash that outshone the sun and cast the city into a moment of frozen, silent terror. High above, the American B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, had completed its mission. Its crew, trained for months in secrecy, had released a single bomb, an object that represented the culmination of years of scientific ambition and military strategy. The men aboard the Enola Gay watched as the bomb fell away, unaware of the full magnitude of what was about to unfold below. The bomb, codenamed Little Boy, was the product of the Manhattan Project, a $2 billion endeavour that brought together the brightest minds in physics and engineering. It was a weapon unlike any other, designed to unleash the power locked within the atom itself. The device detonated not on the ground, but 2,000 feet above the city, directly over the Shima Hospital. This point, forever marked in history, became known as the hypocenter, ground zero of a new era of destruction. The explosion that followed was beyond comprehension. In a fraction of a second, a sphere of energy expanded outward, brighter than 1,000 suns, vaporizing everything at its core. A fireball, searing and merciless, rose over the city. Its core temperature soared to 6,000 degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. For those closest to the blast, there was no time to react, no chance to flee. In that instant, men near the hypocenter were simply erased from existence. Their bodies were vaporized, leaving behind only faint shadows scorched onto stone steps and walls, a haunting testament to their final moments. A split second later, a shockwave of unimaginable force tore through the city. Travelling at nearly 1,000 miles per hour, it shattered windows, collapsed buildings, and hurled debris with lethal velocity. The invisible fist of compressed air flattened Hiroshima with indiscriminate fury. Entire neighbourhoods vanished in an instant, reduced to splinters and dust. An estimated 60,000 buildings were obliterated. Within a 2-mile radius, 90% of the city's structures were reduced to a wasteland of twisted metal and charred wood. The familiar landscape was gone, replaced by a panorama of devastation. From the heart of this destruction, a colossal mushroom cloud began to rise. It was a sight both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a monument to the destructive power that had been unleashed. The cloud billowed upward, a churning mass of dust, debris, and superheated gas, reaching 7.5 miles into the stratosphere. It was visible for miles, a signal to the world that something irreversible had occurred. The mushroom cloud hung over the ruins like a malignant deity, casting a dark, foreboding shadow over the dead and the dying. For those who witnessed it, the image would be seared into memory forever. Below, the city was engulfed in a firestorm. Overturned braziers, shattered gas lines and splintered wood ignited, feeding flames that leapt from building to building. The fires merged into a single roaring inferno. What little the blast had left standing was now consumed by flames, turning the city into a vision of hell on earth. In the first terrifying moments, it is estimated that 70,000 people lost their lives. Many were men, students, workers, soldiers, caught in the open, unable to escape the fury unleashed above them. They were teachers, factory workers, soldiers and boys on their way to school. Ordinary people, each with hopes and dreams, swept away in an instant. They were simply people going about their Monday morning, caught in a historical event they could not comprehend. The city's men, young and old, were thrust into chaos without warning. The sky, which had been a serene blue just moments before, had fallen. The peace of the morning was shattered, replaced by confusion, terror and loss. The heavens became a canvas of blinding white light, followed by an earth-shattering roar and a suffocating darkness. The world as it had been known was gone. For those who survived the initial flash and blast, a new ordeal began. Men staggered through the ruins, wounded and disoriented, searching for friends, brothers and fathers amid the devastation. The landscape was unrecognizable, a nightmare of ruin and suffering. The world had changed forever at 8:15 a.m. In that moment the sky burned and nothing would ever be the same. The human tide, survivors on the Miyuki Bridge. In the frantic hours after the bomb detonated, Miyuki Bridge, about 1.5 miles from the hypercenter, became a desperate artery for the city's survivors. The bridge, battered but standing, was one of the few structures left on the edge of Hiroshima's burning core. Its stone arches, scorched and cracked, rose above a landscape of utter ruin. The river below was choked with debris, and the air shimmered with heat and smoke. For thousands the bridge was the only escape from the inferno. Men, their faces blackened and clothes in tatters, stumbled across its length, fleeing the flames that devoured the city centre. The bridge became an impromptu sanctuary. Wounded men collapsed on the hot pavement, their bodies scorched, their eyes glazed with shock. Some clung to the railings, others huddled in small groups, sharing what little comfort they could find. The procession was slow and silent. Men shuffled forward, their movements stiff and agonizing, as if every step was a battle against the pain. Their skin hung in strips, their hair singed away, and their arms held out to avoid the agony of burned flesh touching their bodies. Among them was Sunao Tsuboi, a 20-year-old university student. He had been just 3/4 of a mile from the blast, and the force of the explosion had thrown him to the ground, his body instantly seared by the heat. Tsuboi's skin was burned raw, his clothes reduced to rags. He crawled from the ruins, every movement a test of will, and finally reached the bridge, where he collapsed among the other wounded. The pavement was blistering hot, and the cries of the injured filled the air. Tsuboi, certain he was dying, searched for a way to leave a final message. With trembling hands he found a small stone and scratched into the dirt. "Tsuboi is dying here." It was a desperate plea for recognition, a hope that someone would know his fate. Around him other men did the same, calling out names, searching for friends, or simply staring into the distance, lost in pain and disbelief. The bridge was a theatre of suffering. Men, young and old, endured wounds that would haunt them for the rest of their lives, if they survived at all. The crowd grew, the bridge groaning under the weight of so many desperate souls. Some collapsed where they stood, others tried to help those worse off, but there was little anyone could do. The survivors huddled together, their bodies blackened and burned, their hair gone, their eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. They moved with a strange uniform gait, arms outstretched, trying to keep their wounds from rubbing against their bodies. The bridge was lined with these silent figures, each step a testament to their will to live. The air was thick with the smell of scorched flesh, the sound of quiet weeping, and the constant, desperate pleas for water. Some men tried to comfort each other, but most were lost in their own agony. Makeshift first aid was all that was available. Men used whatever they could find: rapeseed oil, strips of cloth, even river water, to tend to their wounds. The bridge was not a hospital, but it was all they had. In the days that followed, the Miyuki Bridge became a symbol of the city's suffering and resilience. It was a place where the living and the dying gathered, united by tragedy, and where the will to survive burned as fiercely as the fires that had destroyed their world. A Lens on Suffering, Yoshito Matsushige's Forbidden Photographs. In the aftermath of the atomic blast, as the city of Hiroshima lay in ruins, one man found himself compelled to bear witness. Yoshito Matsushige, a photographer for the Chugoku Shimbun, was not just a survivor. He was a chronicler of history, driven by a sense of duty that transcended personal safety. At 32, Matsushige had lived through the unimaginable. The bomb detonated less than 2 miles from where he stood, and in those first moments he was gripped by shock and disbelief. Yet, as the dust settled, his instincts as a photographer took over. With trembling hands he reached for his camera. The world around him was unrecognizable. Buildings reduced to skeletons, streets choked with debris, and the air thick with the cries of the wounded. 3 hours after the explosion, he began his journey toward the city's heart, each step heavy with dread and purpose. When he arrived at Miyuki Bridge, the devastation was overwhelming. The bridge, once a symbol of daily life, was now a silent witness to tragedy. Matsushige stood frozen, his mind reeling at the sight before him. Hundreds of men, burned and bleeding, lay scattered across the ground. Their faces were contorted in pain, their bodies marked by the bomb's fury. The silence was broken only by the occasional moan or plea for water. Matsushige's heart ached as he raised his camera. For 20 agonizing minutes he hesitated, torn between his responsibility to document the truth and the overwhelming empathy he felt for the suffering men before him. Each frame he considered felt like a violation, yet he knew that without these images the world might never understand the true horror of that day. Taking these photographs was not only emotionally excruciating, it was forbidden. The Japanese government, desperate to maintain morale, had outlawed any photography that could be seen as damaging to the war effort or public spirit. Military police and government officials enforced these rules with unwavering severity. Anyone caught defying the ban risked arrest, interrogation, and severe punishment. Matsushige was acutely aware that every click of his shutter could bring dire consequences. Yet the devastation he witnessed demanded to be recorded. The bomb's aftermath was not just a military event, it was a human catastrophe, and Matsushige felt a profound obligation to ensure that the suffering of his fellow citizens would not be erased by censorship or forgotten by history. With every photograph he risked his freedom and his life. His hands shook, not just from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. He knew that these images would be more than just pictures. They would be evidence, testimony, and memory. The faces he captured were etched with pain and disbelief. The bodies, charred and broken, told a story that words could never fully convey. Matsushige understood that if he did not document this moment, it might vanish forever, lost in the ashes of Hiroshima. Summoning his courage, he pressed the shutter. In total, he managed to take only a handful of photographs that day, each one a testament to his resolve and the unbearable reality he faced. The images Matsushige captured on Miyuki Bridge became the first visual record of the bomb's human toll. They were stark, unflinching, and impossible to ignore. The photographs are haunting. each face a silent scream, each frame a window into unimaginable suffering. In one frame, a group of dazed survivors stands together, their clothes in tatters, their faces blackened by soot and blood. Their eyes, hollow and searching, seem to ask questions for which there are no answers. Another photograph shows a policeman, his uniform torn, attempting to write certificates for the dead and injured. His face is set in grim determination, a symbol of order amid chaos. Matsushige's images are not sensationalist. They are quiet, dignified, and deeply respectful of the suffering they depict. Each photograph is a silent act of remembrance. The raw, unfiltered reality in these images forced the world to confront the true cost of nuclear warfare. They stripped away abstraction and revealed the bomb's impact on flesh and spirit. For decades, Matsushige guarded the negatives, hiding them from authorities and preserving them through years of uncertainty. In the 1970s, they were painstakingly restored, ensuring that the truth they contained would endure. Today, Matsushige's photographs are an essential part of Hiroshima's story. They are displayed in museums and exhibitions, serving as a visual anchor for the city's collective memory. These images provide undeniable evidence, complementing the oral testimonies of survivors and ensuring that the world cannot look away from what happened. In the faces Matsushige captured, individuals were later identified, their personal stories forever linked to the historical record he created. Each photograph became a bridge between memory and history. For some families, these images offered a final, heartbreaking connection to loved ones lost. One family recognized a young boy on the bridge, identified only by the distinct shape of his ears, a silent testament to the power of a single photograph. By defying the ban and risking everything, Yoshito Matsushige ensured that the world would see the true face of nuclear war. His courage preserved the memory of the victims and forced humanity to confront the consequences of its actions, ensuring that the suffering of Hiroshima would never be forgotten. The Lost Generation, the Youth of Hiroshima. In the years before the war, Hiroshima's boys filled the city's streets and schoolyards with laughter and energy. They gathered for class photos, their faces bright with the promise of futures yet unwritten. These boys, sons and brothers, were the heart of their families and the hope of their city. The atomic bomb did not discriminate by age, but its timing and location resulted in a disproportionate toll on the youngest male residents of Hiroshima. A significant number of the victims were boys and teenagers, their lives cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. Research conducted by Professor Keiko Otani has revealed a chilling statistic. An estimated 22% of those who perished in the bombing were adolescent boys, primarily between the ages of 13 and 14. This was not a tragic coincidence. These young students had been conscripted into the war effort, their youthful energy redirected from classrooms and playgrounds to the dangerous work of preparing the city for conventional attacks. Instead of learning mathematics or playing baseball, they were handed shovels and crowbars, their hands blistered from the labor of tearing down wooden houses. As part of Japan's desperate wartime measures, over 8,000 boys were mobilized for demolition work across the city. Their specific task was to create fire breaks, wide, open lanes designed to stop the spread of fires that would result from anticipated incendiary bomb raids. Many of these student work crews were assigned to areas within a mile of what would become the hypocenter. On the morning of August 6th, thousands of them were out in the open, armed with simple tools, tearing down wooden houses under the summer sun. They were directly exposed, with no shelter, when the sky flashed white. The statistics are horrifying. 60% of boys working within 1,000 meters of the epicenter were killed instantly. The stories of these young victims are woven into the fabric of Hiroshima's grief. Families waited for days, then weeks for sons and brothers who would never return from their work assignments. Schools were wiped out, entire classes of boys vanishing in a single, terrible moment. A diary entry from a young boy found in the ruins might speak of his hopes for the future, while the next page remains forever blank. These children were not soldiers. They were boys fulfilling a duty imposed upon them by a nation at war. They were robbed of their futures, their potential contributions to the world extinguished before they had a chance to truly live. The loss of this generation left a deep and permanent scar on the psyche of Hiroshima. The city was not only physically destroyed but also demographically wounded. The absence of these thousands of young people created a void that could never be filled. Their memory serves as a particularly poignant reminder of the indiscriminate nature of the bomb. Memorials specifically dedicated to the mobilized students now stand in Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, silent stone testaments to the boys who were sacrificed. Today, visitors, both young and old, gather at these memorials, their presence a living tribute to the lost youth of Hiroshima. Their stories underscore the tragic reality that in modern warfare, the lines between combatant and civilian, adult and child, can be cruelly and irrevocably erased. The immediate physical injuries from the blast, the burns, the cuts from flying glass, the crush injuries from collapsing buildings were horrific enough. Men staggered through the ruins, their uniforms and work clothes scorched, skin hanging in tatters, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. However, a far more sinister and invisible assailant was also at work: radiation. It drifted through the air, clinging to skin and clothing, seeping into wounds, and settling deep within the bodies of those who had survived the initial blast. In the days following the bombing, a mysterious and terrifying illness began to afflict the survivors, even those who had appeared to be relatively unharmed. Men who had walked away from the ruins, seemingly lucky, soon found themselves gripped by weakness and confusion. Doctors named it the Hiroshima Plague. They watched in helpless frustration as their patients, fathers, brothers, sons, succumbed to symptoms they had never seen before. Its symptoms were frightening and unfamiliar: uncontrollable vomiting, high fever, severe bleeding from the gums and under the skin, and clumps of hair falling out. Men who had survived the firestorm now found themselves fighting an invisible enemy within. This was acute radiation sickness, a condition the world's medical community was only beginning to understand. Japanese and foreign doctors alike pored over medical texts, desperate for answers as their wards filled with suffering men. Dr. Harada, a surgeon who treated countless victims, described the unique and devastating nature of the burns caused by the bomb's thermal rays. He recalled how the skin of men who had been working outdoors peeled away in sheets, leaving raw, weeping flesh exposed to the air. Unlike conventional fire burns, these were caused by an intense, instantaneous pulse of radiation heat. The flash had seared through clothing, branding the skin beneath with patterns of pain. The skin of the victims would often peel off in large sheets, exposing raw, weeping flesh underneath and causing excruciating pain. Dressing these wounds became a daily ordeal for both the patients and the doctors. Many survivors were left with permanent disfiguring scars known as keloids. These thick raised scars twisted across arms, backs and faces, a constant reminder of the day the sky fell. These were not ordinary scars, but thick, rubbery growths of tissue that could restrict movement and cause chronic pain and itching. For many men, even simple tasks became a struggle. These keloids became a physical, outward sign of being a survivor, a brand that many carried for the rest of their lives. In gatherings, men would quietly compare their scars, each mark telling a story of survival and loss. The long-term health consequences of radiation exposure were equally devastating. As the years passed, men who had once been strong and healthy found themselves returning to hospitals again and again. In the years and decades that followed, survivors known as Hibakusha experienced significantly higher rates of various cancers, most notably leukemia. The disease struck without warning, sometimes decades after the blast. The bomb had damaged their bodies on a cellular level, planting a time bomb that could detonate years later in the form of a terminal illness. Each diagnosis was a new blow, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. Children who were exposed in the womb or in their early years were particularly vulnerable. Boys who had survived the blast grew up under the shadow of illness, their futures forever altered. The Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, established by the United States, meticulously studied these effects, creating a vast database on the medical legacy of radiation, a legacy written in the suffering of Hiroshima's people, especially its men and boys. This hidden enemy, radiation, created a new kind of fear. It was a threat that could not be fought or seen, only endured. It was an injury that could not be seen, a poison that could lie dormant for decades. Every cough, every ache, every unexplained fever brought a wave of dread. It meant that for the Hibakusha, the bombing never truly ended. The past lingered in every shadow, every hospital corridor, every scar. Every unexplained fever, every ache, every new spot on their skin could be a sign that the plague was finally claiming them. The uncertainty gnawed at their peace day after day. This constant anxiety was a psychological burden that compounded their physical suffering. Many men lay awake at night, haunted by memories and fears they could not share. The wounds of Hiroshima were not just on the surface. They were etched into the very DNA of the survivors, a cruel and lasting reminder of the day the sky fell and poisoned everything beneath it. For the men and boys of Hiroshima, the struggle did not end with survival. It became a lifelong battle against the unseen scars left by the bomb. In the desperate aftermath of the atomic bombing, Hiroshima became a city of silent agony. The instinct for survival was paramount, but it was not always applied equally. The air was thick with dust and the cries of the wounded echoing through the ruins. On the crowded Miyuki Bridge, a grim and unspoken triage began to take shape. The bridge, once a symbol of connection, now became a place where fate was decided by the cold logic of a nation still at war. Survivors, many barely able to walk, gathered in hope of rescue, their faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief. The Japanese military, what little remained in the city, moved quickly to organize relief efforts. Their priorities, however, were unmistakable. Orders were issued with military precision, and the soldiers, faces grim, uniforms torn and stained, set about their work with a sense of duty hardened by years of conflict. Eyewitness accounts, such as that of Cadet Goro Takeuchi, reveal that soldiers were explicitly ordered to prioritize the evacuation and treatment of other military men. The able-bodied and those deemed useful to the continuing war effort were given precedence. Young men, some still in uniform, others in tattered civilian clothes, were pulled from the crowd and placed on makeshift stretchers or helped onto trucks. The process was swift and unsentimental. Soldiers loaded their wounded comrades onto trucks, their faces set in stoic determination. Meanwhile, civilians, many of them elderly men and boys, lay on the bridge and roadsides, their pleas for help often going unanswered. Some reached out, hands trembling, only to be passed over by the hurried rescuers. It was a brutal reflection of the wartime mentality that had permeated every aspect of Japanese society. The collective good of the nation, as defined by its military leaders, superseded the individual suffering of its people, even in the face of an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. Decisions were made quickly, often with little regard for the individual. The suffering of the many was weighed against the perceived needs of the nation. For those not deemed essential, hope faded with each passing hour. The initial medical response was overwhelmed and tragically inadequate. 90% of the city's doctors and nurses had been killed or injured in the blast, and most hospitals and clinics had been reduced to rubble. The few surviving medical professionals, many themselves wounded, worked in makeshift shelters surrounded by chaos. These doctors and medics, faces drawn and hands shaking from exhaustion, treated catastrophic burns and injuries with whatever was at hand. Rapeseed oil, sump oil from machinery, and scraps of cloth became precious resources. The stench of burned flesh and oil filled the air as they worked through the night, their efforts a testament to human endurance. These were desperate measures for desperate times. The sheer number of casualties made it impossible to provide meaningful care to everyone. Men and boys with grievous wounds waited in long, silent lines, some collapsing where they stood, others clutching at their injuries in mute agony. The most vulnerable, those too weak to move, the elderly and the very young, were often left behind. Their cries faded into the background as the triage process continued, relentless and impersonal. Along the roadsides, groups of men and boys sat in silence, waiting for help that might never come. Some stared blankly at the devastation, others whispered prayers or called out for lost family members. This hierarchy of survival added another layer of tragedy to the aftermath. The value of a life was measured not by need, but by perceived utility to the war effort. Choices had to be made, and in the chaos, those with the loudest voices or the most perceived value were often the ones who received attention. Others, too weak or too old to advocate for themselves, faded into the background. Even in a moment of shared, unimaginable suffering, societal structures and military priorities dictated who lived and who died. The triage was not just a matter of medical necessity, but of national policy. The scene on the Miyuki Bridge was not just one of physical devastation, but also of a moral collapse, forced by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The bridge became a symbol of the choices forced upon a broken society. For the thousands of civilians left to fend for themselves, it was a harsh lesson that their value as human beings had been weighed and found wanting in the final, desperate days of the Empire. Their survival depended not on the severity of their wounds, but on their perceived utility. In the end, the grim triage of Hiroshima was a reflection of a society pushed to its breaking point, where compassion was rationed as strictly as medicine. After Japan's surrender and the beginning of the American occupation, a new and complex chapter began for the survivors of Hiroshima. The city, still reeling from devastation, became the site of a unique and controversial scientific endeavor. In 1947, the United States military established the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, or ABCC, in Hiroshima. The Commission's headquarters, a stark and utilitarian building, quickly became a focal point for both hope and suspicion among the city's residents. Officially, the ABCC's mission was to conduct long-term research on the health effects of radiation among the survivors. The stated goal was to advance medical understanding and promote peaceful applications of atomic science. Teams of American doctors and scientists, many of them experts in their fields, arrived to set up laboratories and examination rooms. For the Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombing, the arrival of the ABCC seemed to offer a glimmer of hope. Many believed that the powerful and well-resourced American doctors might provide the advanced medical care they so desperately needed and could not find in their ruined city. Survivors arrived at the ABCC's doors, some travelling from distant prefectures, hoping for answers to the mysterious illnesses and lingering wounds that plagued them. The American doctors, with their white coats and unfamiliar language, represented both authority and the possibility of healing. However, The reality of the ABCC was starkly different from its public mission. The Commission's primary function was not treatment, but data collection. The survivors were subjected to a battery of tests, blood samples, physical examinations, and detailed interviews about their experiences on the day of the bombing and the symptoms that followed. The ABCC's staff meticulously recorded every detail, filling out data sheets and compiling medical records. The survivors' bodies became the subject of intense scientific scrutiny, their suffering transformed into statistics and case studies. Under the guise of providing medical examinations, the ABCC systematically gathered a vast repository of information on the bomb's effects. Blood was drawn, X-rays were taken, and survivors were measured and weighed. Some were asked to return for follow-up visits, their health tracked over months and years. In some cases, the Commission even harvested organs from the deceased for study, preserving samples in glass jars and sending them to laboratories for analysis. The ABCC's research delved into the cellular and genetic damage caused by radiation, seeking to understand the mechanisms behind leukemia, cancer, and other illnesses that appeared in the aftermath of the bombing. All of this data was classified as top secret and sent back to the United States. The findings were carefully guarded, accessible only to select officials and researchers. For the survivors, the experience was often humiliating and disheartening. After enduring hours of examinations, they were sent home with no medicine, no therapy, and no answers. The ABCC observed, but it did not treat. The Commission staff watched and recorded, but rarely intervened to alleviate suffering. This practice created a deep sense of betrayal and resentment among the Hibakusha. Many survivors felt they were being treated not as patients, but as human guinea pigs. Their pain and trauma were being quantified and analysed for the benefit of the very nation that had inflicted it upon them. The clinical detachment of the ABCC's work only deepened the wounds of those who had already lost so much. The Commission's findings, though invaluable to science, came at a great human cost. The data collected formed the basis for much of what is now known about radiation sickness, genetic mutations, and the long-term health effects of nuclear exposure. The ABCC, working closely with occupation authorities, also played a role in suppressing information. All Japanese photos, newsreels, and medical reports related to the atomic bombings were confiscated. The full, horrific truth of the bomb's effects on human beings was largely hidden from the American public and the world. This policy was driven in part by a desire to quell public fear and pave the way for the development of a civilian nuclear power industry. Documents, photographs, and film reels were locked away in archives sealed from public view. The survivors' stories and the true scale of their suffering remained largely untold for years. The work of the ABCC was a complex and morally ambiguous undertaking. On one hand, the data it collected has been invaluable to the global understanding of the long-term effects of radiation exposure, informing safety protocols for nuclear workers and medical patients worldwide. The Commission's research contributed to the development of radiation safety standards, cancer treatment protocols, and emergency response strategies for nuclear accidents. Its findings have saved countless lives in the decades since. Yet, the methods of the ABCC were deeply exploitative, capitalizing on the suffering of a vulnerable population without offering compassionate care in return. The survivors' trust was often met with indifference, their needs subordinated to the pursuit of scientific knowledge. The ABCC stands as a powerful example of how scientific inquiry can become detached from human empathy, casting a long, cold shadow over the already tragic legacy of Hiroshima. Its legacy is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge must never come at the expense of compassion for those who suffer. For the men and boys who survived the atomic blast, the end of the war did not bring peace. They became known as Hibakusha, explosion-affected people, a term that would shape the rest of their lives. This label, meant to identify them for government aid, soon became a mark of social stigma that followed them everywhere. In the years after the war, a deep and irrational fear grew around the Hibakusha men and boys. People believed the atomic plague, radiation sickness, was contagious and kept their distance. Others thought the survivors were genetically damaged and that any sons they had would inherit invisible defects. This ignorance bred a culture of discrimination, adding a cruel psychological burden to the physical pain these men and boys already carried. Many Hibakusha men and boys were forced to live in the shadows, hiding their past to avoid rejection. They concealed their status to find work, to secure a place to live, and especially when seeking to marry and start families. Potential spouses and their families would often hire private investigators to ensure their intended partner was not a male survivor from Hiroshima or Nagasaki. To be identified as Hibakusha was to risk being ostracized, to be seen as damaged goods, unfit for work or marriage. Many survivors, therefore, never spoke of their experiences, burying their trauma deep inside, even from their closest friends and family. They carried not only the visible keloid scars on their bodies, but also the invisible scars of social rejection and fear. Despite these immense challenges, the Hibakusha men and boys demonstrated extraordinary resilience. Over time, they began to organize, forming groups like the Japan Confederation of A and H bomb sufferers organizations, Nihon Hidankyo. These organizations fought for government recognition, medical assistance and financial support for male survivors. More importantly, they provided a community where men and boys could share their stories without fear of judgment. They transformed their personal suffering into a collective political and moral force. They decided that their experiences must not be hidden away but must serve as a powerful warning to the world. Many Hibakusha, like Sunao Tsuboi, who had once scratched his own epitaph on the Miyuki Bridge, dedicated the rest of their long lives to activism. They travelled the globe, speaking to world leaders, schoolboys and citizens, sharing their first-hand accounts of nuclear horror. Their mission was simple and profound: to ensure that no one else, especially future generations of men and boys, would ever have to suffer what they had suffered. They became the most credible and powerful advocates for peace and nuclear disarmament. Their resilience turned a label of stigma into a badge of honor, representing not victimhood, but the indomitable strength of the human spirit, especially among men and boys, in its quest for a better, safer world. Gap 3S. As the smoke cleared and the fires dwindled, Hiroshima's ruins revealed a haunting phenomenon, the shadows left behind by the atomic flash. On stone steps, bridge railings and building walls, dark silhouettes marked where men and boys had sat, walked or waited in the instant the bomb exploded. These Hibakusha shadows, created by the bomb's searing, light-bleaching exposed surfaces, became some of the most powerful, silent witnesses to the tragedy. For the young boys who had gathered on their way to school and the men hurrying to work, these imprints were a cruel reminder of lives erased in a single heartbeat. Survivors would return, years later, to these sites, searching for the outline of a friend, a father, a brother, or even themselves. The city's new residents, too, could not ignore these marks. They became a part of the urban landscape, a chilling art of absence. Scientists, drawn to Hiroshima in the bomb's aftermath, meticulously documented these human shadows. Their research revealed the staggering intensity of the atomic flash, which in some places had reached 6,000 degrees Celsius. The shadows were not just physical remnants, they were forensic evidence of the bomb's power, providing insight into the physics of the blast and the fate of those caught in its path. For many Hibakusha men and boys, the shadows became symbols of both loss and survival. They spoke in whispered tones of the ghosts on the stairs, not to frighten but to honour those who had vanished. Artists and poets in the years that followed found inspiration in these outlines, using them in murals, literature and memorials to keep the memory alive. The shadows, stark and unyielding, forced all who saw them to confront the reality of nuclear war. Not as an abstraction, but as a tragedy measured in individual lives. Even today, as Hiroshima's cityscape has been rebuilt, some of these shadows remain preserved in museums and memorials. They serve as a bridge across generations, a visual connection to the moment when time stood still. The shadows on the wall are a reminder. Every life lost left a mark, and every survivor carries the responsibility of memory. Today, on August 10th, 2025, 80 years have passed since that fateful morning. The city of Hiroshima awakens beneath a peaceful sky, a world away from the devastation that once defined it. Hiroshima is once again a vibrant, bustling city, its modern buildings and tranquil parks standing in stark contrast to the desolate wasteland it once was. The city's streets are filled with the energy of daily life, a testament to the resilience and determination of its people. Yet the memory of the bombing is not buried beneath the new concrete and asphalt. It lingers in the air, woven into the very fabric of the city. The legacy is carefully and purposefully preserved by those who tend to the memorials and educate the next generation, ensuring that the lessons of Hiroshima are never forgotten. The A-bomb dome, the skeletal remains of the former prefectural industrial promotion hall, stands as a silent, powerful monument near the hypercentre. Its battered frame is a stark reminder of the destruction unleashed that day. Now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the dome is a permanent, physical reminder of the destructive power that was unleashed here, and a symbol of the city's enduring spirit. The city itself has become a global symbol of peace, drawing visitors from around the world who come to pay their respects and reflect on the meaning of Hiroshima's legacy. The legacy of Hiroshima is carried forward primarily through the voices of those who lived through it. Hibakusha, the survivors, who share their stories with unwavering honesty. The testimonies of the Hibakusha are the most vital part of this remembrance. Their words, spoken in quiet rooms and public gatherings, echo with the pain and hope of a generation forever changed. Their stories, filled with emotional depth and harrowing detail, translate the abstract concept of nuclear war into a tangible human reality. Each account is a window into the suffering, courage and endurance of those who survived. They speak of the black rain that fell after the blast, a toxic deluge that brought further suffering to those who had already endured the unimaginable. They recall the desperate cries for water, the overwhelming thirst that gripped the wounded as they searched for relief amidst the ruins. They remember the loved ones lost in an instant, the empty places at family gatherings, and the names etched in stone at memorials. These personal narratives, along with the haunting photographs taken by Yoshito Matsushige, prevent history from becoming a cold set of statistics. Each image, each memory, is a testament to the lives forever altered. They force us to confront the individual faces of suffering and the true cost of conflict. The pain etched on each face is a silent plea for understanding and remembrance. The long-term consequences of the bombing continue to echo through the generations. The scars, both visible and invisible, are carried by sons, grandsons and great-grandsons, shaping the lives of those born long after the blast. The scientific study of the Hibakusha provided the world with its most comprehensive understanding of the effects of radiation, shaping nuclear policy and safety standards for decades to come. But the true lesson of Hiroshima is not scientific, it is moral. The city's story compels us to reflect on the choices we make and the values we hold. It raises fundamental questions about warfare, humanity, and the weapons we create. The legacy of Hiroshima is a challenge to our conscience. The decision to use the atomic bomb remains a subject of intense historical debate, but its consequences for the people on the ground are undeniable and everlasting. Hiroshima forces us to consider the ethical lines that should never be crossed, even in times of war. The city's experience is a warning written in the language of loss. The ultimate message from Hiroshima is one of hope and warning. Out of the ashes, a commitment to peace has grown, stronger with each passing year. The resilience of its people, who rebuilt their lives and their city from the ashes and dedicated themselves to advocating for peace, is a profound inspiration. Their efforts have transformed Hiroshima into a beacon for a world seeking reconciliation. However, their stories also serve as a solemn caution in a world that still possesses thousands of nuclear weapons. The threat remains, and the lessons of Hiroshima are as urgent as ever. The memory of Hiroshima is not meant to incite hatred or guilt, but to foster a deep and abiding commitment to peace. It is a call to action for all who visit and for all who remember. It reminds us with chilling clarity that the sky fell once. The silence that followed was filled with lessons that must never be forgotten. The enduring echo of that day is a plea to all of humanity, across generations, across nations, to ensure that it never falls again. The legacy of Hiroshima is not only a memory, but a living guide for the future.